Hello, everyone. This is Yvonne and Lyle. Welcome to our true crime podcast today.
Come on right along, let me tell you a tale.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to WTBL, Walking the Blue Line. And I don't know if you've joined us before, but my husband, and he's been in law enforcement line for how many years now?
Recently retired, but after 40 of service, including a little bit of time in the military, which is where I started, and then hired at the Spokane County Sheriff's Office. Did a number of years in uniform, and then probably the majority of my career as a detective, and finished it up working as a supervisor for the forensic unit of the Spokane County Sheriff's Office.
Right. You did a lot of other jobs in there too, though, because you started out as like a street cop and then you actually did transport and you worked in the schools and you were a teacher. So you've done quite a few different jobs in your career.
Yeah, you like to break it up, and there are so many things that people can do in law enforcement because, you got canine officers, you've got helicopter pilots. The transport was we would take people from the jail and transport them to court or to medical appointments or sometimes halfway across the state because prisoners need to be moved from one jurisdiction to another.
Today, we're going to kind of focus in on towards the latter years of your career where you were a detective and kind of into the CSI stuff, but everyone knows what those shows are all about.
Right. We watched, I think, probably shortly after I became a detective, or maybe it started before I became a
I think
detective.
it did. I think it started before.
Right. The CSI one in Vegas.
Where they have the stuff see through in the room, and they're like moving their hands and you can see through. It looked like a projection actually of like a screen. And just so people know that's not really true.
They came up with so much razoo stuff on
Yeah.
that show. And then, of course, all of the ladies dressed in stiletto heels and
Yeah, I always
responding.
wondered how that worked when they were out there on 24-hour shifts doing a crime scene. You're not going to be one to walk in stilettos.
And all of the guys driving the super cool Hummer V. It was
It was a nice show,
Right.
but not too much in reality.
But the funny thing about that show is that it spawned this one thing called the CSI effect, which really affects jurors.
And it's not a good thing.
No, I mean, so you've heard of it, right?
Yes, I have.
So what do you know about the CSI effect?
Well, what I know is like in the beginning, I think one of the biggest things I can remember is the GSR, the gunshot residue.
Oh, right. Yep.
And everyone, it was all about that. Well, if there was a shooting, you got to check for this GSR. And you do that. But there were so many things that they didn't specify about how it worked. And so when you get these people that are the jurors, what about this or what about that? You're like, oh, well, that's a part of it, but it doesn't quite work exactly the way the show portrayed it. And so that was one thing that as you're watching the show, you start thinking, why aren't they solving these crimes?
The show makes it seem like, oh, well, you can get
Instantaneous.
exactly. In today's world, we are moving that direction where things can be processed quite a bit quicker. But in those days, especially, some of this stuff,
we're 10
months.
years ago. Yeah.
Well, even today, to get an actual sample from the crime lab may take easily 3 to 6 months.
Now,
It just
that's a long time when you watch a show, though, and you're like, well, they got it back 2 days later or that day. And
right.
so these jurors are wanting to know what's going on. And that was the effect that it caused.
Exactly. And so when you would select a jury and they would come into court, they would expect to see all of this science that went into this investigation. And the truth is sometimes these cases don't have hardly any science. Maybe there isn't a reason to have DNA, or there wasn't a gun that was fired, so there is no gunshot residue.
Or if they did, maybe they wore gloves and you don't have the gloves. I don't think a lot of people don't realize there's also a thing of touch DNA. So you could get so many things contaminated just because someone touched it.
Exactly.
And so it kind of created this bad effect, really.
So there's all these myths out there, surrounding the CSI effect from the show. And one of the big ones that you just mentioned is gunshot residue. The FBI did a study a number of years ago and realized how ineffectual
Right.
GSR is because
They don't use it much anymore.
no, they don't, because it's very transitory.
Mhm.
And you think about it. If you were a completely innocent person and you're being accused of having fired a firearm and the police come and arrest you and put handcuffs on you,
Mm.
have they just contaminated you with GSR? Because,
Right. They touched something, now they touched your hands, they put cuffs on you.
right,
Guess what? That's all transfer.
exactly. And what does a cop carry with him all the time?
A gun.
A gun.
Yeah. And
And
you're constantly touching it, even if you don't mean to.
it could easily be transferred. So that was what the FBI had
Mm.
indicated in some of their studies, is, as well as a number of other places, is gunshot residue could be found when someone hasn't fired a firearm. As well, it can so easily be washed away or wiped away. So the absence of gunshot residue does not mean that
They didn't shoot it.
they didn't shoot it.
Right. Somebody knows about this. All they have to do is wash their hands really well. And guess what? They're going to probably test negative,
Right.
or someone test positive that didn't do it.
So one of the things at the Spokane County Sheriff's Office was our unit was called forensics rather than CSI, or crime scene investigators. And forensics, actually, there's a meaning to that word.
Mm.
Forensics is the application of science to law. Not all forensics people do DNA or firearms. There can be a forensic component to almost anything that is out there. I remember here in the Spokane area a few years ago, there was this huge fire and it burned down all of these homes.
Mhm.
And so the insurance company had to hire these forensic engineers to come in and look at the homes to see if the foundations had been compromised by the heat of the fire.
And cracking of the foundations and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
The heat causes the concrete to spall, and some of those homes had to be completely dug up and new foundations poured, and others didn't. It took a forensic engineer to look at that. So when you're talking forensics, it can be anything. In our application, crime scenes, most of these people get on the job training. Takes a long time to get good at what you're
It
doing.
usually takes about 2 years in one particular area.
Different agencies throughout the nation do it differently. They each have their own policies, or they have
Mhm.
their own budgets too, what they can
Right.
afford and what they can't afford.
And I
Um,
think also jumping in here, a lot of people, I've mentioned this earlier in one of our podcasts, how much training you guys actually do. And it isn't just you go, you get a degree and you're done. It's kind of like a teacher. You constantly are going back and getting more training to keep up. Like a nurse or a doctor, you have to keep up to date. And
I think that when you look at all the careers that are out there
Mhm.
nowadays, decades ago, it was a simpler time. People would get a degree or they'd get trained in a career field, and they would go do that, and they would just get better maybe through experience or
Yeah.
something. But now our world is so concentrated on more education and conferences and
Well, even technology, you can buy a phone or a computer in 5 years, it's out of date. If you're not constantly keeping up on learning the new stuff, you're going to fall behind.
as a detective, I had gone to these conferences. I learned how to triangulate and plot cell phone data.
But yeah, you solved a case on one of those that you did that with.
That was a big portion
Mhm.
of the evidence, is where was this phone at? What time was it there? Who were they contacting? All of this data that you have to pour through.
And it's a lot. You used to get a list of all the calls you've made.
Right.
And nowadays, holy smokes, people aren't always calling or texting. It's pages and pages and pages of numbers and where you're at. And I do think in some ways it's a really cool that you can like ping these phones, because there's been numerous cases where I've seen where they kidnapped somebody. Well, they got their phone. So now both of those phones are pinging at the same area. So they can't say, oh no, I wasn't there.
Right.
Well, your phone was, and so
Yep.
was this person's, and
And the data that law enforcement can get from the phone companies is quite a bit more detailed than what you would see in your normal phone bill, but it follows along that lines. One of the cases that I helped investigate, the Shannon Starbuck case,
Yeah.
that was one of the things. She had called 911, but in her call data,
didn't show
it didn't show
because
until
that's a protective thing.
Right. So we couldn't just look at her
And
phone.
tell that she had called, right. You guys actually didn't find that for quite a while, right?
Right. It was several weeks until we got the information back from the phone company,
Mhm.
and there was a record that she had called 911. Then we were able to go dig else. So I think that's the other thing about the side effect is
Right.
the public has this image that we've got all of this data at our fingertips.
You have to get requests and you have to go through all these hoops to get that information.
Right. I can't just go pull up somebody's information
Right.
because I want to see what they did. I have to take.
Don't you have to get a warrant?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So, in order to get a warrant, you have to have what they call
Probable
probable
cause.
cause,
Yeah.
right? PC. And so you have to write out a document that says, this is why I should be able to look at this person's information. And then you have to take that document to a judge and they review it to see whether or not they think you.
They agree with you or
Right.
yeah, this is really a good cause.
Right. And there were times where I would write a warrant and go to the judge, and the judge would say, no, I just don't see it. And I would have to go back to the drawing board, and additional information is required.
Well, and also back, I don't know how many years ago, but a lot of times you guys would do this. You get the warrant, and the phone companies wouldn't give you the information. And since then, I think they've cracked down on them a little bit, haven't they, on making them give you the information?
Well, it goes back and forth. It's
Does it?
constantly a game. I recall a couple of different times submitting warrants, Facebook, for instance, and they basically just said, no, we're not going to comply. And then you would have to do some legal wrangling back and forth in order to get them to give you the information that
Information,
you
yeah.
needed as to who was this person communicating with. And that too didn't happen overnight.
Right.
Sometimes it would take weeks because when you do think about it, Facebook has what they call a legal compliance section, and they are answering not just the requests from our department, they're answering that.
All over. I
Yeah,
mean, any kind of crime that involves Facebook. I
right.
mean, actually, a lot of crimes have been solved by just seeing who people are messaging. And
And
they think, oh, well, I'm going to go through Messenger, so you won't be able to trace it or something like that. And it isn't as easy, but it can be done. You do have to jump through quite a few hoops to get this information. You can't just say, oh, I want to see what this person's doing.
when you submit a warrant, you get in line and you think about how many warrants on a daily average do places like New York City
Oh, my
Police
goodness.
Department and Los Angeles Police
Mhm.
Department and all of these huge cities around the nation, how many are they submitting? And then you're a small little agency somewhere in the middle of Montana or
Right.
something like that, and you send your warrant in on a homicide. It's just as important to solve that, but it gets put in line behind all the others, and then it takes some time in order to get
Right.
that. Facebook is one of the ones that we mentioned, but you think about AT&T and
Oh man,
Verizon.
there's like endless ways that people can contact each other. And nowadays, I don't know that much about it, but you can get fake numbers off of all of these apps.
Right.
And I know that I've seen people on crime scene shows that they can't ever find them because these people change their numbers because they change apps.
Well, and that's like you said, as far as being a detective and having to go and learn all this stuff and keep up,
Hmm.
because when I first became a detective, one of the things that most houses had a
Right.
landline,
Right.
and that's how they connected to the internet,
Right.
or they connected maybe through their cable. Like if you had Comcast is a provider that was here in the area, or now it's Xfinity, and they would actually run a physical line to your house.
Hmm.
And then you could get an IP address, an internet provider address from any particular message. And so if you knew how to do it, you could backtrack and figure out exactly what house did this come from. But
Right.
now in the world of mobile
Mm.
devices,
You don't really know.
but that doesn't necessarily give you a location of where this person is at, or you have to pair that then with maybe some cell service information. The amount of time that goes into investigating that is part of the reason why some of these crimes don't get solved immediately. It takes months, if not years, sometimes to delve through all that data.
So let's say you get called out on a crime. What is the first thing that you guys do?
Well, usually the patrol officer is going to be
Mhm.
the first person. And Let's say we're talking mostly about homicide. So they get there and they have kind of a prioritization
Hmm.
of, hey, number one, let's save some lives. So they get there and they look at the victim and decide, can we save this person? Is this an obviously deceased individual, or is medical intervention going to help? So they're going to go with the medical intervention very first thing. But then if that's passed, now our next thing is, okay, we have to preserve everything. We've got to lock this scene down, get everyone out, put up our cordon tape, and then start
So,
looking for evidence. And nowadays, that could be surveillance video. So you're looking for cameras in the area,
mhm.
anything outside. And if you've got a large enough agency, they're going to be calling detectives, and pretty much the patrol officers are just going to hold the scene until the detectives can get there and start making some decisions.
I can remember when you were working and you would get a call out, and I was just like, well, I'll see you in 2 days because I almost never saw you under 15 to 18 hours. That's after you've already worked your workday normally. Sometimes I just dreaded it.
I remember one call, I didn't even get out my door and I was like, called off. And it was kind of funny because it was just a little bit of jumping the gun where dead body was reported at the river.
Yeah.
And so they called and said, hey, we've got a deceased individual. And so I'm at home getting all my clothes on and heading out the door.
They weren't really deceased,
No,
were they?
the patrol officers, someone I think had reported it
Right.
as they're going down the river, and the patrol officers get down there and the guy jumps up and is like, I'm just out here sunbathing. But
That was very unusual though,
that
because
was,
most of the time you would work all day, come home, we'd have dinner or something. We're just getting ready to go to bed and the phone rang and I already knew what that meant. And
yeah.
it's like, well, I'm not going to see you for a long time.
And
So,
And typically we try to get some rest, but there were definitely times where I worked a 24-hour
oh
day,
yeah.
if not more, because once you're on the scene, you're moving forward. There's a show out there, the first 48. That's the most critical hours. That's when the most evidence, and you don't want to lose that evidence. So you get on to the crime and you start moving and trying to figure this out as quickly as you can.
The bad thing is though, people are human. And
Absolutely.
after a certain amount of hours, you're just not as sharp.
Well, and that's true. One of the things that I know has stumped people or people have commented about over the years is like you'll see the news cameras, right? And you see
Hmm.
all of us out there and people are standing around with their hands in their pockets and they're like, well, what are these guys doing? But it really is a team effort. So a lot of times we'll have a couple of guys working the crime scene and a couple of guys doing interviews, gathering information. And in the meantime, all of this information is being filtered back to the lead investigator, or he's taken an active part. So decisions are made collectively. It falls with one person, but usually it's a collective decision. So when they're standing around with their hands in their pockets, they're probably having conversations, composing theories. They're
Working on a game plan too, though, like
exactly
how do we
working up a
wanna
game plan.
well, one thing I remember, you telling me is that in the beginning, when something would happen, you'd, like, try to get witnesses and you wanted to, interview them immediately, and you've changed that a little bit because 'cause you've realized that in the moment, all this adrenaline's going and all this people can't think clearly sometimes, and so you'll talk to them, but then you'll give them a little while to calm down and then you'll go talk to them, and you found that it works better.
There are various situations that will dictate when do we interview someone,
True.
but
Or they'll remember more if you give them more time to think about it.
right, that's one of the things that's criticized heavily in the press is especially with police officer involved shootings. Why do they give them a certain amount of time before they interview them? There is an academic out there that runs a company called Force Science. And they've done huge studies in this as to when is your best time for recall. And basically, they say after sleeping on it for about 24 hours, you will have a better recall to allow those thoughts to become ingrained as well as just let the adrenaline come down.
Mm.
And your recall will be better than sometimes immediately after the incident. So there's Again, that kind of goes into the forensic thing. These academics, they study these things and they can tell you this is what is best serving the investigation, or
Mhm.
this is the science behind it.
Okay, so you've gotten to the scene, you've gotten the police officers there or the deputies have got everybody out, you got your tape up, and so that's kind of your first steps. What are your second and third steps?
We want to take a look at the crime scene to see what we're dealing with so we can make a game plan.
Mhm,
So typically, we will don protective gear so that we don't spread any contamination within the scene. And
mhm,
then your lead investigator or your crime scene investigator, being a detective, and maybe your crime scene person who is a forensic, the one that's going to be doing photographs and such, will do a walkthrough of the
mhm.
scene and they'll kind of make a game plan of, okay, this is what we got, and this is how we go about processing it to preserve the most information that's
Mhm.
there and make sure we don't damage anything. That first walkthrough is probably one of the most important things for a detective. We hope that you're enjoying today's podcast.
And if you are, please like, subscribe, and share.
Then, once that walkthrough is done, we have to document everything as it was when we showed up.
Is that with pictures and
Yep.
the little cards and numbers
Right.
or
Well, actually, it comes as a two-stage process. So we'll do what we call our overall photos where we don't change anything.
anything
Yeah, we just take
of
photographs and
everything?
video.
Yeah.
Yep, the way that it is, the moment that we get there, other than you might see some crime scene tape in the background or something like that.
Mhm.
And then once we get those photographs taken of everything, then we usually go back and we start marking evidence. And that's when the little placards, the
Right, the
numbers,
numbers, yeah.
those will be put into the scene saying, okay, this is number one item we want to collect, or there's a little arrow pointing to a location where we're going to take a swab of blood, or if you got a bullet hole, you might have a marker that actually has a scale on it so you can get an idea of the dimension and size. And
Mhm.
so there too goes a lot of decision process of like, how do we mark this? What are we marking it
How are
with?
you gonna photograph it?
How are you
Yeah.
going to photograph it?
That's another thing that you actually went and got training for was photography. You think that you're gonna show up and you take a picture, but you got fairly nice cameras and you gotta learn how to work them and what lighting and what angles. You can distort something pretty easily by taking it with bad lighting or at a weird angle or with nothing there to, um show the size. If you don't have
Right.
some comparisons, you're like, "Oh, this is really big," and when actually it's really small.
Number one, the people that go out and do these photographs have to go through an extensive amount of
Mm,
training just so they know how to operate their camera,
right.
operate it properly. Almost all of the photographs that we take in a manual setting. So it's the operator that is adjusting the lighting and those kind of things. And you want to get it color correct,
Mhm.
especially, you're dealing with blood and some things that,
Or clothing that
or,
maybe you wanna try to match to somebody. If you take it and it looks orange, but really it's pink, that could throw somebody off.
right. Yeah.
It's like, "He was in an orange shirt," and you see this pink picture. Well, that's not it.
And then you wanna get an angle of a photo can really change the size or make it look distorted, so you try to get all of your photographs at a 90-degree angle, and like you said, you gotta have a scale in there. We take photographs of footwear impressions or
Right.
tire tracks, and they're gonna use those photographs to actually compare to a real item if we find an item to compare it to. So you gotta have that scale in there so you can get it exactly one to one in
Mhm.
size. A little bit of size change could make a whole difference.
Well, yeah, we've done a couple of these podcasts on shoes. You get an imprint of a shoe. Well, if you don't have something there to tell you what size it is or how long it is, you might think, oh, this is a huge shoe, and really it's a small one, or vice versa.
Documenting a fairly small crime scene can take hours
Hours, yes.
because you've got hundreds, if not thousands, sometimes photographs that you're going to take because you're going to take one set without any markers and another set with markers. And then every item of evidence that you collect is most likely going to be photographed. And if not just from one angle, from multiple angles.
Mhm.
a lot of photography.
Also, you don't do it as much as people would think, but fingerprinting, you might have to do a lot. And sometimes you're not going to do any or very little. And that's something else you have to be trained on. Even patrol officers have to learn how to lift a print.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that they try to teach them right from the
Hmm.
get-go. Different agencies have a little different outlook on how they do this. Big agencies, they call specialists to fingerprint everything, and the patrol officers don't do anything. If you go to a very small agency, they're going to do it. Spokane County is a mid-size agency, and every patrol officer carries a fingerprint kit with them.
Right. I noticed our daughter was actually complimented on one that she lifted, and someone in the office
Right.
was like, "Wow, this is a really good one." And I was like, "Oh, that was my daughter."
If you get a little bit of training, it really isn't a difficult thing.
I imagine you could mess it up.
Well, absolutely. There are lots of ways. And then going back to the CSI effect, a lot of people don't
Oh yeah.
understand about why fingerprints are there sometimes and why they're not. The obvious is like if someone wears gloves or the texture, you're not going to get a fingerprint off of your carpet,
Mhm.
most fabrics, those kind of things. You're just not really going to get that. But even something flat like windows are great for fingerprints, right?
Mhm.
But if the moisture isn't right, if their skin is super dry, if they smudge it, they smear it, there are lots of reasons why on a perfectly good surface under normally good conditions, you may not get a fingerprint being left there. Other times I've seen fingerprints lifted from a rock, which is
Yeah,
something you
which is
wouldn't.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, they can get prints nowadays on things that if someone would have told me it a while ago, like, no way you did get a print off of that.
Um, Majority of fingerprints are probably lifted at the crime scene. You get a vehicle prowling or you get a home burglary or something like that, and the patrol officer will come out and they'll lift or try to lift fingerprints. But from a homicide, what we have kind of a rule of thumb is like if it can be transported, if it can be taken to the lab, that's what we do because there's a number of various methods that can be used in a lab to lift fingerprints that aren't really conducive to being done out in the field.
I know a long time ago, it was a big thing with super glue, and they figured it out on a fluke because people were buying super glue, and there's all these fingerprints on the inside of what was packaged. And then they figured out, oh, if we put super glue on something, it brings it to.
What we call a latent print, and latent meaning that it's kind of invisible. And
Hmm.
then when you apply super glue and a little bit of dye stain or something like that,
Hmm.
now it becomes a visible print.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, super glue cyanacrylate is a method of raising fingerprints so that it'll take them from the invisible stage to the visible, and then they can be photographed and compared. One of the coolest methods that not a lot of people are aware of is this one called a vacuum deposition chamber, and it actually uses gold and silver
Really?
and it vaporizes it and it falls onto the area where the print would be. And it actually does the opposite of what the cyanacrylate or super glue does. Super glue adheres to the little ridges that are left, and the gold in the vacuum deposition adheres to the valleys. So you kind of get a reverse
A
fingerprint.
reverse finger.
But
Oh,
then the
interesting.
same thing can happen and you can end up comparing that. And they don't just use gold and silver, although those are a couple of the common ones, but they're depending upon what they call the substrate, the item that it's left on. They might use zinc or copper. There's a whole host of different types of metals that can be used. It's kind of an interesting or a neat
Mhm.
process, but
Well, I know that this is a little off, but I remember watching a few shows where someone has been murdered. There's blood, or they think there was blood, and it's been cleaned up, and people are think, oh, well, I cleaned it up good. Then, but you got to have all different kinds of chemicals too. One is luminol. I know that from the TV shows. They sprayed luminol over everything. There's blood everywhere. Oh,
well, CSI wasn't completely off base.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Luminol is definitely still used. One of the chemicals that we use is luminol based. It's called Blue Star, and it does do that very thing, is that it reacts to the iron in the blood and it will glow. With Blue Star, you can be in a totally dark room, and
Oh,
when you
wow.
spray it on what they call chemiluminescent, it will glow on its own, and then we can photograph that in the dark. But what it mostly does is that little glowing, whether you get a chance to photograph it or not, it tells you that there's blood in this area. And then you can swab that blood for DNA, or you can use other processes to bring it out and see it. There have been a number of crime scenes where I've been at over the years where someone has tried to clean up blood.
Mhm.
And then we come in and there's a couple of different chemicals that we can spray on it. And all of a sudden you can see these wipe marks.
Everywhere. Those chemicals are pretty cool because they take something, like you said, that you latent, you couldn't see it, and now you can see it. But also, things that people don't know is you guys pull off like trim or pull up carpet. And even though someone's cleaned it to where chemicals don't show it, wouldn't be surprised how many times you could found a drop of blood behind a trim piece of board and you swab it and dang, there you go.
Right. Well, and that's not only just the trim boards and such, but like some of the newer photography equipment we have using infrared lights and such will actually see through the coats of paint. So you can
Oh, that's right.
see
Yeah.
that blood was smeared on this wall.
Maybe
And then,
somebody painted over it to clean it?
yeah,
Yeah.
instead of cleaning it up, they just paint over it. And then here's this blood still on the wall.
Mhm.
And we can get a sample of that and potentially get DNA, or at least be able to show that there is someone's blood there. Photography is a really pretty cool thing, and a number of things that we can do with it. Not only do we photograph to document the everyday things that you come in and see, but then you have infrared photography, which can highlight gunshot residue, like a hole in someone's shirt or blood. And it could be on a black shirt, but when you use the infrared light, you'll be able to see it.
Trust me, sometimes they do these procedures where you take a blue light and you go through a house. If you have animals, trust me, you don't want to do this because I try to keep my house pretty clean. And Lyle comes home one day and he's, look at this, I got this blue light. And he showed, and I'm like, oh Lord, I'm going to have a heart attack. You know, I'm like a germaphobe, but you have dogs and cats. It's impossible to not get something somewhere. Oh,
Right.
Lord.
Yeah, and some of the houses that I've been in and such, you're glad that you have personal protective equipment
Yeah,
on.
I was in the hazmat suit and all
Right,
of that.
because you start waving
The
the
blue light
light
around.
around.
Oh,
Yeah.
goodness.
There's all kinds of things that even a common person, you don't have to be
You
a forensic
no,
scientist
you
to
sneeze
find.
or something and you're next to a wall, guess what? You gotta
It is amazing a lot of the techniques that are out
yeah.
there, people aren't even aware of that they, like I said, could use in their own home
Yeah.
to find.
No fancy equipment
Right.
needed.
One of the great scientists at the forefront of everything that we do today is a man by the name of Lockhart. And Lockhard's principle basically says that every time you enter a room, you bring something with you, and
Mhm.
every time you exit,
You
you
take
take something
something with
with you.
you. Yep.
And that is a big principle of forensics, is that whoever the suspect is comes in, they're probably going to leave something.
Something.
And at the same time, when they left, they took something with them. So if you can find those things, then definitely is going to help solve your crime.
Well, and you hit on one of these that we haven't touched on too much in our podcast. The use of dogs, canine.
Right.
Those animals are incredible. Talk about taking something with you or bringing something in. Dogs are amazing and what they can sniff out. It is kind of cool though that they are working, so you have to give them breaks and you have to play. I always used to wonder, what are they playing ball with that dog for? But these dogs are working so much in their senses. They got to have a break and some release. They will be out there playing ball with them, letting them run around a little bit.
Well, and the sad aspect of that is that they do actually have a shortened lifespan,
Hmm.
because some of these dogs are riding around in the backseat of cars. And you think about it, they're there when the officer gets in a pursuit. They're
Right.
there with the adrenaline pumping in unknown situations every night. Um, dogs by trait aren't normally or necessarily nocturnal, but they're working the graveyard shift with their handler. It's a hard life for them, but they add so much. I wasn't a canine handler myself. I worked with a number of dogs though over the years, tracking people when we would get into foot pursuits. And it was amazing to watch them hunt this person down.
Smelling them or,
Right. To follow that track and to be able to catch this person that's running away from you.
they can help find someone in avalanches or someone
Oh,
lost in the woods.
search and rescue.
We actually had a dog that had puppies, and one of our puppies went to a search and rescue, and I was really happy about that. Even though it's hard on them, that I'm how proud is it to have a dog that turned into something that could save somebody.
Right, save someone's life
Yeah.
and point in the right direction.
Mhm.
These that I worked with a couple of times that were quite amazing were the cadaver dogs, the
Oh,
ones that
yeah.
find the deceased or remnants of the deceased.
Or
And
even where someone was laid.
right.
Sometimes people will bury someone just to get it out of the way for a moment, but then they move them. And these dogs can tell that there was a body that was laid here at one point, and it's
Well,
amazing.
and one of the cases that I'll highlight at some point was actually solved specifically because of that dog, because we didn't know where the crime scene was,
Mhm.
but the dog was able to lead us to where the person had been killed. And at that point, we were able to go ahead and process the crime scene and find the evidence that we needed to show that this individual was dead and that a homicide had happened there. So it is amazing the work that the dogs can do.
Kudos to those animals.
Right. Some of the oldest technology, you might
Right.
say, at work in today's modern society.
That's true.
So we haven't even touched on DNA. DNA has come so far. We, in an earlier podcast, talked about some evidence that got mishandled because no one knew about DNA back then. There was a baseball cap that got passed around to a certain degree.
They
And
thought they were helping by showing the cap and having a reenactment, but in reality, it made it a little more complicated. But you were able to go in and determine what was DNA that shouldn't have been on there.
I can't fault the older detective because of the fact is that they didn't know about that
No,
back in the day. That would be like us doing something now that we have no clue about, then being
20
criticized.
years from now, they're going to be like, why did they do
Did
that?
it.
You're like, well, we didn't know.
Right.
And I'm sure in 20 years, things are going to be even more advanced.
But we were talking about it at the beginning. You could send something to the lab back in the old days, and it would take 6 months easily for them to get a DNA sample. And just as I was leaving the sheriff's office, our forensic lab had gotten a unit called Rapid DNA. And these are starting to be deployed all across the nation, and they can give you what's called a single source. So if you took a swab of somebody's mouth, they could develop a DNA profile on that in 90 minutes.
Wow.
And you don't really need a whole lot of training because it's all internal. You basically take the swab, you put it in the machine does the work, and then it has to be reanalyzed by a scientist before it's called a confirmation one way or the other. But it's with incredible accuracy in 90 minutes that this machine can do that. And they're only getting better and better.
I'm sure. I'm sure they will.
Um,
One day you'll just swipe your cell phone over something.
Exactly.
Probably like, oh, I've got it right here, just like Star Trek or something.
Yeah, you think about we've got handheld cell phones now,
Yeah.
but back in the 60s when Star Trek came out with what did they call it, the communicator or something
Yeah.
like that, it was like, oh yeah, or the
The
Jetsons,
tricorder. Yeah.
or think about the Jetsons when the Jetsons cartoon was on and you had a television screen. They were talking back and forth. Well, that's real today.
Yeah, it
I was
is.
like, never imagined that when I was a
Well,
kid.
even what we're doing right here
Technology is
wasn't
amazing.
possible.
Where we left off, though, a little bit as to like what happens next. After we do all of that documentation and then we photograph all of the items that we're going to collect, we collect those items and then we start looking at them for what we would call probative value. What is it going to tell us? If you go into a house where a husband and wife live and the crime is a homicide where the husband kills the wife, Having his fingerprints there aren't
Doesn't really matter because they're
right.
supposed to be there.
Exactly. So there's no probative value to that. His cell phone, on the other hand, where he's communicating with, say, a new girlfriend,
Mm,
that might be really significant. So you have to take all of this evidence and decide what is important and what's not important. So, what are we going to have analyzed? So, if our theory is that the husband killed the wife, we're not going to spend a lot of times looking for his fingerprints
right.
but we might spend a lot of time with a digital forensic person
Searching his phone.
or his computer or his
Yeah.
laptop or
Tons of things have been solved through people's search history.
oh,
I
yes.
don't understand why someone's like, I don't have anything to do with this. And then they pull up their computer. Yesterday you were searching, how's the easiest way to kill my wife? I
Right.
mean, like, really, dude, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
or
Well,
or vice versa.
yeah, and the thing is, it's lucky for the victim, the victim's family, and the police that the individual performing that search doesn't have a real good concept of how this can be found
Yeah.
and or traced or
Yeah.
anything like that. And at the same time, it goes back to what we were talking about early on. The police can't just walk in and say, "Hey, I want to see that." And get a look at it. They have to go through steps and procedures to get a warrant.
And then they have to analyze it. Just because
Yeah,
you get it doesn't mean you automatically know. You've got to search it. And sometimes people have gone to such extremes as that they destroy things and they think, oh, well, I smashed it. I burned it. There's no way they're going to get info. But somehow somebody who's had the training can take a little piece of something and, hey, look here, there's evidence here. I can
right.
remember a crime where it was a really old iPod. And you remember you'd have those teeny tiny little pictures.
Oh, right.
And this lady was going through this old iPod and come across these, they were smaller than thumbnails.
Yeah, they were
And somehow she found a picture. This person had killed someone and taken a trophy picture.
right.
And it was in that. And there was a whole bunch of them. How she found that picture, I'll never know.
Well, and I told you about one of the homicides that I investigated where the suspect took the victim's phone and they destroyed the phone, but for
Mhm.
some reason they took the SIM card out of the phone
And used it or something?
and they kept it.
I kept it.
So 2 years later, when they were arrested, in this storage box that they had was this SIM card, and we went through every electronic device that they had, and lo and behold, here's the victim's SIM card from his phone in their possession. It's something real tiny and
Yeah.
seemingly meaningless, but at
Something
this
you're gonna forget about pretty easily.
right, yeah, exactly. I'm sure that they didn't even realize that they had it. The other thought is that every time that there is a cell phone conversation, there's actually 3 records of it. There's the one on your phone, the person that initiated it. There's the record on the person that you're talking to, the receiver, and then there's the copy that the phone company has.
Right.
A lot of people will go to some effort to destroy all of this stuff, but there's still a copy out there
Mhm.
that they're not even aware of. It's amazing that they do internet searches on how to kill somebody.
I think technology is good and bad. It's good where you can solve crimes. It's bad where no one has any privacy anymore. But the thing I was going to say is that it amazes me the amount of people that do get away with stuff. Cold cases are abound. They're everywhere, and it's unfortunate that a lot of them will just never be solved.
I absolutely agree. I know a number of police officers themselves that don't like all of the tracking. You wonder, is Google recording every conversation we have in our house? You're taking a recording device with you everywhere
Everywhere
you
you
go
go, just
because,
about.
yeah, because most all phones, if they're Apple, they respond to Hey Siri, which means Siri is listening to you. And if they're Android, it's Google, just like or Karina or
Oh, yeah.
whichever service
We
that they happen
have.
to use.
That brings up an interesting thing to me because we have kids and they're all grown now. And I can't tell you how many times we've been on the phone talking to each other. And one of us will say something like that. Hey, Siri. Well, their Siri picks it up. So guess what? Not only is it in your home, but if you say something and now it's in someone else's home,
Right.
it's crazy.
Yeah, we've been on the phone conversation and I've been able to turn their lights
Oh,
on or turn
yeah.
their lights off. by just saying, "Hey."
Or even outside, you've got ring cameras. You have cameras to protect yourself because we live out in the country and you just never know who's going to show up. So we have cameras at our barn and on our house and in the yard.
Kind of a double-edged sword is that you're giving up some of your privacy, or it was never really your privacy to begin with. If it's out in the open, anybody could see it. But at the same time, it has led to significant higher solve rate for homicides and robberies all across the board. Is that, these people who very well may have once gotten away with this kind of thing because there was nobody there to witness it, now are on a ring camera somewhere,
Mhm.
or their vehicle is on a ring camera, or
Yep. Or they drove by a store that has a
right,
surveillance video or
their phone pings in the area. It is quite amazing how much we're tracked, and the fact that you can't get away with it. So,
or away from it.
right. So, I mean, the best thing is just not to do anything wrong,
That's
but
right. That's the best best way not to get caught.
caught
Don't
and
do
do it.
it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I guess kind of to finish up all of those things, we collect everything and we decide its probative value, and then we send it off to the lab and we have it analyzed. And that could be one of several different labs. I mean, it could be digital, goes to our computer people. It could be firearms, goes to our firearm people, or DNA lab. And then when the detective gets all that back, they're going to look at the analysis, try to make some decisions. And a lot of times it still comes down to interviewing people.
And after that, if you can get a case, you might have to go to court. You
Mm,
might settle, but you might go to court.
exactly. Yeah. There are a lot of plea bargains.
Mhm.
People see the mountain of evidence against them.
It's them and they're
And
like, "Oh, I'm not
sometimes,
gonna win this."
right, yeah, and so they try to get the lowest sentence they can through a plea bargain, and then there's other people that'll never ever admit, even with the pile of evidence against them, that, "Hey, I did this," and they
Mhm.
will fight it all the way
To
to
the
the end.
end. Yep.
Yep,
We just hope somewhere in there justice is
it's done.
found
Yep,
and done, and yeah, the right people go to jail and the right people get off. And
right,
but there's flaws. There's
exactly,
flaws in everything.
absolutely. Well, I hope that some of this discussion is enlightening for those people that wonder how we go about creating a case or working a crime scene and getting forensics involved.
It's a lot of work.
It is. It's a team effort
It
for
is.
sure.
Not one person ever solves a crime.
Mm, different people get credit for it sometimes because they maybe were the one in the lead, but at the same time, it is a huge team effort. So
And we appreciate those people that try and give up their time, put themselves in danger.
dedicate their hours. I mean, the number of overtime hours that law enforcement people work is crazy.
It's hard on a family,
Yeah, it is.
especially if you got young kids. It's hard, especially if both of you are in that field. But anyway, we have to have those people out there, and happy that they can get some of this stuff done.
So, well, thanks for coming along with us today on this ride along, and tune in again next week and we'll have either another story or some more discussion for you.
Maybe even a guest speaker.
Yep.
We'll see.
All right. Bye.
From our hearts to yours, we hope.